You'll be at your best.
I hope so. All right. Good morning. Oh, you're so kind. Thank you so much. Have a good morning. I hope everyone is well and looking forward to today's daf. Today's daf is Nazir daf Nun Tet. We are at the 2 dots on Nun Chet Amabet. And what are we talking about? So let me share my screen and then we'll talk about, see exactly what we're talking about. What we've been talking about is we've been focusing on the issue of a Mitzorah shaving, despite the fact that there's a prohibition on shaving. So, because a Mitzorah has to shave his entire body, head, beard, eyebrows, everything, every piece of hair as part of his cleansing process. Effectively, he almost becomes like an alien in his own body. And, to the extent that one understands the Mitzorah as being a punishment for telling Lashon Hara, so then, one can understand why that might actually be the case. But in any event, the bottom line is that he's got to shave everything, and he shaves it all with a razor. And so, but we also know that a Kohen is not allowed to shave one's hair, the corners of one's head. A Yisrael, and there's both a positive commandment associated with that and a negative commandment associated with that. The Yisrael is not allowed to shave the corners of his beard, corners of his head, pas roshcha, pasikanecha. So, and then a Nazir is also not allowed to shave any of the hair on his head. And yet, despite those prohibitions, we learned that a Mitzorah who is a Yisrael or a Kohen or a Nazir, or multiples of those, obviously can't be a Kohen and Yisrael, but a Kohen and a Nazir, a Kohen and a Yisrael and a Nazir, if any of those situations, they still will have to shave despite the prohibition, because the positive commandment of shaving in connection with the Mitzorah is going to override that. Now, once we're talking about rules in connection with cutting hair, we're now going to talk, as I mentioned at the very end of yesterday, about another interesting rule that relates to the cutting of hair, and that is that we have a prohibition in the Torah, in Dvarim Kaf Bet Pasuk Hey, where it says a man may not wear a woman's clothing. And this prohibition is understood as not only including wearing a woman's clothing, but engaging in other activities that are associated with women, including hair removal. And so the Gemara is now going to address whether this violation would preclude a man from shaving his body hair. And so we're going to pick up at the 2 dots. And the 2 dots, we say, Amar Rav. Rav says, Meikal Adam Kol Gufo Basar. A person can lighten their body, anywhere on their body. This is a language that is used for cutting hair. And so the language with a razor. And although the implication in other contexts is Meikal means just to trim, here it seems like it means that it is referring to an actual shave. And so that is what Rav says, that because presumably, why is this not covered by the prohibition about a woman? Presumably it is, that's what we're going to ask. So Meisvei, they ask a question. Well, 1 second, what about the following prohibition? Hamavir beis hashechi ubeis ha'erva hareza loka. That if in fact one were to remove hair from their armpit or pubic area, so then you are going to you're going to get lashes, because you'll have done what violating the prohibition of a man not wearing a woman's clothing. So how do we explain these two? Because it seems like Rav is saying it's permitted and the Brisa is saying it's prohibited. So habasar habas misparayim. So when the Brisa says that you're not allowed to shave, so that's shaving with a razor. And when Rav says that you are allowed to shave, that's talking about with scissors. Well, 1 second. How can you say that Rav was talking about scissors? It says, Meikal Adam Kol Gufo Bisar. It explicitly says that Rav was referencing a razor. So how could you, Rav Nami Bisar Kamer? Rav said it explicitly was with a razor. So Ke'ain Tsar. tar. So when we say razor, it doesn't mean, when he doesn't mean to be literally with a razor, he means like a razor, means actually very close to the skin. And so that is the conclusion. And so that is one explanation. So based on that, one is allowed to shave one's hair on one's body if one is male using scissor technology. So, the way that many men shave their hair on their beard would be a permitted manner, according to this, to shave your hair on the rest of your body, again, not using a razor. So Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba now, so that's point number one. So now we go to point number two. Rabbi Chia bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Hama'avir Beisa Shechi Ubeisa Erva Loka. If you remove the hair, and now we're talking presumably with a razor, then you are going to be subject to lashes. Well, Meisvei, one second, we have a brisa that suggests otherwise. What does the brisa say? Now, this is a different brisa than the one we put before, because actually we already have one brisa that says that it incurs lashes. We quoted that in order to challenge Rob. But now we quote a different brisa, and the brisa says, Ha'averes se'ar Eina midivrei Torah, ela midivrei sofrim, that the prohibition against shaving one's armpits and one's pubic area, that is not a biblical prohibition. It's only a rabbinic prohibition. So why did Reb Chia say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that he's going to get lashes? Shouldn't the punishment be rabbinic lashes, makos mardus? So my loka nami dekamar midirabanan. So what the explanation is the lashes must not be biblical, it must be only rabbinic lashes. And so that's why that's the answer to that question. So that's answer number one. But we're going to now say, Ikad Amri, as we turn to Nuteta Moralis, there's another way that we could understand, meaning there's another approach that we have with respect to this story. That what did happen? So again, same original statement. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hamaver Beisa Shechi Beisa Erva Loka Mishum Lo Yilbash Gaver V'Sim Lasisha. So again, the person Rabbi Chia bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that anybody who removes their under armpit or a pubic area hair, that is going to result in their getting lashes because they're engaging in an act that is associated with women. So Meisvei, I don't understand how Averes Seyar Eina Medivrei Torah El Medivrei Sofrim. How can you cite a verse from the Torah? We have a brisa that says that it's only rabbinic. So Huda Amar Ki Haitana. So Rabbi Yochanan says a different Tana. Tanya Hamavir Beisa Shechi Ubeisa Erva Hareza over Mishum Lo Yobash Geveros Maslisha. We have another brisa that says this is exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said. So bottom line is we have two brises. We have a brisa that says that it's a biblical prohibition to shave one's armpit hair and one's pubic hair, and one that says it's a rabbinic prohibition. So okay, so now the Gemara wonders. The Tanakama, the one who says that it's only a rabbinic prohibition, Hai lo yilbash gever my darishbe. What does he do with the pasuk? Meaning, obviously, when one says that it's a biblical prohibition to shave one's underarm hair and one's pubic area hair, well, that suggests that the pasuk is specifically coming to tell us that. Well, what is it specifically coming to tell us for the other opinion? Because so we need it for the following. Because what does the pasuk say? Lo yekli geber alisha. The pasuk says that you can't put the vessels of a man on a woman. So my Talmud Lomer, what is the pasuk talking about? Im shelo yilbash ish simlat isha. If what we're talking about is just not wearing the other gender's garments, the isha simlat ish, but whether a man wearing a woman's or a woman wearing a man's, hare kvar ne'amar toevahi. I don't understand. Why would that be an abomination? What would make that so terrible that the Torah would actually go so far as to call it an abomination? The Ein Kan Toeva, what kind of abomination is there? Ella shelo yilbash ish simlat isha v'yeshev ben hanashim. Well, the point is that we don't want a man to wear a woman's clothing and then go sit with the women and appear to be a woman and thereby have access and ability to see things that would not be appropriate for a man to see. V'isha simlat ish v'seishev ben hanashim. So what's really the problem is, as we understand this, or what makes this so offensive is the fact that a person would be wearing another person's garment and effectively deceive the people around them. So if there's a deception going on, well, then that's inappropriate. So as a result, that's what the Torah is coming to tell us. So the Torah is not coming to tell us about not shaving. That obviously is not connected directly to the concept of sitting with the wrong gender. And so as a result, that's not going to fool anybody. And so that's not going to be prohibited biblically. But what would be prohibited biblically? Anything that would engage in some kind of trickery associated with it. And so that's the view that would say that this is only a rabbinic prohibition to shave the hair like a woman. However, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, no, minayin shelo teitze isha b'chlei zayin l'milchama. What is it actually coming to tell us? It's actually telling us that a woman shouldn't go out ready for warfare, that she shouldn't wear a gun on her holster. She shouldn't have a sword on her in her belt. So Talmud Lomar lo yechli gever al isha. That's how we know that a woman should not go out with wearing with vessels of warfare. And what about v'lo yilbash gever simlat isha? Well, what do we learn from the fact that a man's not allowed to wear a woman's garment, meaning beyond the literal? So shelo yisakein ish b'tzikunei isha. He shouldn't beautify himself with the ways that a woman beautifies herself. And so that would indicate, and that would suggest, the prohibition of shaving their armpits and pubic area. Okay, so now that we've reviewed this, and we see that this is a debate among Tanaim, so now we're going to have three different rulings / incidents that the Gemara is going to talk about. So, ruling number one, Amar Rav Nachman ben Nazir mutar, that actually, if you're dealing with a Nazir, something is permitted. Now, what is it that's permitted? So let's take a look. So 1 second, I realize I did not make the note in my Gemara, so I'm going to make the note. So let's take a look at Tosos, where it says a Nazir would be permitted. So it's the third Tosos on Tet Amud Aleph. The Nazir mutar. What is it that is mutar? Tosos tells us laha'avir beit hashechi ubeit ha'erva. That's to remove the hair in the armpit and in the pubic area. The kasavar, because according to Rav Nachman, who is making this statement, what does he think? Achareishin Nazir ma'avir kol sa'ar rosho. Once this Nazir is removing all the hair on his head, well then lo chashiv noi, that's not considered beautiful, and therefore v'tikun, and therefore when and v'tikun legabi oto ha'ish la'avir beit hashechi u'beit ha'erva, and that's not the beauty that was that was the reason behind the rabbinic prohibition of shaving one's hair. And so as a result, he would say and therefore he would say that one is allowed to do that. And now the Gemara continues, V'leis hilchasa kivasei, that the halacha is not, in fact, like Rav Nachman, and using the last now words of Tosos, the asar af l'nazir, because in fact we would say that even according to a Nazir, it is prohibited. So even a Nazir would not be allowed to. Obviously, the Nazir isn't obligated to shave this armpit and pubic area. They're only obligated to shave the hair on their head, and that is why they would not be allowed to do it if in fact it was prohibited. So okay, so Amru, so that was number one. Amrule Rabbanan l'Rebbe Shimon Bar Yabba. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba, so these were presumably students of his, Chazina le l'Rebbe Yochanan deleisle. We've noticed that Rabbi Yochanan does not have any hair under his arms. So why is that? How does that indicate that he had removed it? So Amar Lahon, Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba explains, no, machmas zikna nashru, because of old age, it fell out. So don't be suspicious of him. That's case number 2. All right, and case number 3, Hahud itchayav negida. There was this guy who was obligated to get some sort of lashes. Kamei de Rabbi Amma, in front of Rabbi Amma, iglae beit hashechi. He raised his arm and revealed his armpit, and they saw that that this was not somebody who was shaving in that area. So chazye delo megalech, he saw that it was not shaven, even though presumably at that moment it was something that many men were doing improperly. So Amar Lahon Rabbi Yami said to the people were there, Shivkua, let him be. Din min chavrehu. This person is one of our friends. He's a good guy. He's he is not one who is going to violate rules unnecessarily. And so must be that this person was subject to some sort of rabbinic punishment. And there was a realization that given the fact that we didn't know this about this guy, if we had known this about this guy, we would have ruled differently. So, all right. So that is case number 3. And now the Gemara wonders, so Rav asked Rabbi Chia, what's the rule about cutting one's hair? Now it's not clear what kind of cutting we're going to talk about, but let's go through the next few lines of the Gemara, next few words of the Gemara, and we'll then go to Tosos, and Tosos will outline for us. So Amar le Aser, it's prohibited. So Amar le, Rav says back to Rabbi Chia, well, 1 second, what happens if it gets really long? And as Rashi says, or I'm sorry, as the Mefarish says, and it causes pain to the person. What happens then? Can you still not cut? So Amar le Bar Pachse, listen, a son of a great person, Zman yesh lo, the hair has a fixed time to it. Meaning Kozman Shehu Gadel, no share, after it has grown as much as it's going to grow, it'll fall out. At least that certainly seems to be the case when I check the drain in my shower. So as a result, so now Tosos is going to help us here. So because the simple understanding of this, let's take a look. The 4th Tosos from the bottom of the page. What is the rule about shaving? So Perish, what is the explanation? Beis HaShechi v'Beis HaErba. Amarle, sorry, the Beis HaShechi v'Beis HaErba. He's asking about the armpits and the pubic area. And Amarle, Aser, and he says back that it's prohibited. So Lefi Girsa Sasfarim Shalom. Now, according to the Girsa that we have in our books, Habaya Bitar Mamish, it seems like the question is about a razor. V'aserlo, and the response is that it's prohibited. Tar, that it's prohibited to use a razor. Umisbarayim shari, and scissors would be permitted. But perish hilchos gedolos. But according to the Bahag, habaya b'misparayim, this question is actually about scissors. V'aserlo, and he prohibited, and Rabbi Chia prohibited Rav from even using scissors, af b'misparayim, even with scissors. The Kain Nira, and that actually makes a lot of sense. Because what does we say? Midikamar v'haka gidul. Well, what do you do when it grows long? Well, umay kushya yitalenu b'misparayim. If in fact the answer to the what happens if it goes long is just cut it with scissors, then what's the question? Meaning, if Rabbi Chia was saying that it's only prohibited to shave with a razor, well, then why do you need to ask about discomfort situations? You can always cut with scissors. So the answer is maybe in fact This Gemara, it seems to be saying that it's actually even with scissors that it would be prohibited. Now, I don't believe that that in fact is the halach. I believe that you can use scissors on the rest of your body hair. Okay, so boimine Rav Rabbi Chia. So again, Rav is continuing his questions of Rabbi Chia. My lachol. What's the rule about rubbing? Look, I can get some of my hair to come out and, under my armpits or in my pubic area. If I just rub the area, it's gonna, the hair will naturally fall out. The follicles will loosen. So Amrlei Usher, nope, that's also going to be prohibited if you're using your hands. Bivigdo Mahu. What if you use your garments? So you don't actually touch it, it's indirect. On some level, it's not using the method that you would ordinarily use. So, and again, this also highlights a consistency with the approach that Tosfos understands, where we say that this question is about any kind of removal, because that's why using, scratching or rubbing is going to be even prohibited according to Rebbe Chia. So Amrlei mutter. But if you use something indirect, so you don't use a shaver and you don't use a razor or scissors or your hands, but you do it in a different manner that is not typically used. So here the example is using with a garment in between. So if I were to go like this just by my, with my clothing on, so therefore there's a garment in between, well then that would be Amrlei mutter, that would be permitted. Now, Ikada Amri, there are others who have a different understanding of this discussion, that this discussion was not in fact about shaving with a razor, but rather at all. And it wasn't about the removal of hair, but rather this whole discussion was about Baimine Bitfila Bivigdomai. What's the law about scratching your armpit under, or pubic area during tefillah when you're wearing the clothes? So you're not touching that area directly. So Amrlei, Rebbe Chia still said, Asr, it's forbidden. But the halacha is not like that. So the only prohibition would be to touch those areas of your body directly. But if you touch those areas of your body through clothing, that is going to be not going to cause you to have a need to immediately wash your hands if you are in the middle of davening. So, all right. So now that we've dealt with all of this, now we're ready to go back to our Mishnah. Now, again, let's remind ourselves what our last Mishnah talked about. The last Mishnah talked about case of uncertainty. Somebody saw two men. Two people, doesn't really make a difference as long as they're, presumably of the same gender, but two people. They saw them become Nazirim at the same time. And then, but he saw one of them become Tameh, but he isn't sure which one of them it was. Maybe he was a long distance away and he saw some kind of thing become Tameh, fly over them or fly under them or whatever. But the point is that one of them became Tameh and he doesn't know which one. And the people themselves don't know which one. That's the key, because if they respond that I know I became Tameh and the other one says, no, I know that I didn't become Tameh, then we're not going to have a problem, because then they know. But we're talking about a situation where they don't know what happened. They didn't even realize what had happened. And so as a result, one of them became Tameh and one of them didn't. And so we went through in the last Mishnah an entire procedure for how these two people should handle themselves. So now we're going to throw a wrench into that procedure. What? Of course, we're going to throw a wrench into that procedure. And so as we turn to Nun Tet Amud Bet, we say, Meit Echad Mehen. Oh my gosh, one of them died before we could do the whole procedure, right? We had a whole procedure where they would basically bring the korbanot of a tahor nazir and the tameh nazir at the same time, and they would agree. Listen, if I'm tahor, then it's for me, and the tahor one is for the tahor sacrifices are for me, and the tameh sacrifices are for you. And if I'm tameh, the tameh sacrifices are for me, and the tahor sacrifices are for you. And then 30 days later, they would continue to observe their nizirut. They would observe essentially a new nizirut, and they would then bring one set of korbanot for a kosher nazir, and they would and in doing so they would say, if I am the naz, if I was tameh, so now is my actual nazirut, and so then these korbanot are for me. And if you were tameh, and then it is really the end of your nazirut, and so these korbanot are for you. But now we can't do that because we don't have one of the pair. So what happens? So Amar Rabbi Yoshua offers the following explanation as to what would happen. So Yivakesh Echad Min Hashuk Sheyidur Kenegdo Benazir. You go find somebody who's a nice, generous soul, and you ask them to become a nazir with you. And you say, Hare Omer im Tameh Hayiti. And then at the end of their nizirut, what do you say to them? Im tameh hayiti. If I was, actually, not at the end of their nizirut, immediately, you know, when they begin it, and you are doing this after your nizirut would have ended, and you have gone through the tahara process. And now we say, V'omer im tameh hayiti. If I was tameh, hareyata nazir miyad. Well, then you'll be a nazir immediately. And v'im tahor hayiti. And if I was tahor, meaning if I really am tahor now, hareyata nazir acher shloshim yom. You'll only become a nazir 30 days from now. The sofrim shloshim umivian karban tuma v'karban tahara. And now 30 days later, you will bring a first set of sacrifices. We'll bring both a tuma sacrifice and a tahar sacrifice. And we'll say, V'omer, and the person who was the original nazir, who's uncertain about his status, what will he say? Im ani hu tameh, if I was the one who was tameh, karban tuma shali, v'karban tahara shalach. Well, then the sacrifice of tuma is my sacrifice, and the sacrifice of tahara is your sacrifice, because you were in fact a valid nazir, because I said that your nazirut would begin now if I'm tameh, and so that's fine. V'im ani hu atar. If, however, I was actually the one who was tahor and I was never tameh in the first place, well then karban tahari shali, the karban tua b'safek. Well then now this sacrifice of tahara is mine, and the sacrifice of tuma is just because I was a suffix. And the note here explains, well, what would be this sacrifice of tuma? The sacrifice of tuma would not just be, now again, as a reminder, what do you bring as a sacrifice of tuma? You bring two birds. One bird is an olah, one bird is a sin offering, and you bring an asham. Now, when you bring an olah, if you bring an olah that you weren't required to bring, not a problem whatsoever. You can still deal with it, because an olah can be a voluntary offering. And so as a result, even though you weren't obligated to bring it, we can just treat it as a voluntary offering. And although we say generally you cannot bring a voluntary sin offering, when you're in a case of uncertainty, you are allowed to bring one type of sin offering, and that is a sin offering from birds. And so as a result, you can bring the sin offering from birds, but you cannot bring an asham offering. So as a result, but the good news is that an asham offering is not ma'akev. If you fail to bring your asham offering, it does not prevent you from restarting your nizirut. And so as a result, when we say that the person would bring the korbanot of tuma, the korbanot of tuma that he would bring is one bird for one bird for an olah and one bird for a chatas. And so that is the plan. V'sofrim, and now what do? We count another 30 days. V'sofrim shloshim yom umavian karban tahara, and then after 30 more days, well, now they bring just a set of tahar sacrifices. V'omer, And the person would say the following. Again, this is the person who was in the case of uncertainty. He was not sure whether he was tameh or not. Im ani hatame, if I in fact was the guy who became tameh, and it was the guy who was tahor who passed away, well then korban tuma shali, then the korban that I brought of tuma 30 days ago, that was my korban, and now and korban tahara shalach, and the original korban that I brought of tahara was yours. And vizeh korban taharasi, and now this korban that I'm bringing 30 days later is my korban for tahara. But imaniya tahor, if I was the one who was tahor, then korban tahara shali korban tumin b'safek. So now, when I was the one who was tahor, so way back then, I brought my sacrifices for being a Nazir tahor, and yes, I might have brought some additional sacrifices, but those were sacrifices out of safek. But none of those sacrifices had to do with you, my dear friend, who has been so kind as to become a Nazir in conjunction with me. But now, v'zeu tarascha, and now this korban that we're now bringing after 60 days, 30 days where we waited for you to be potentially obligated, and then 30 more days for you to be definitely obligated. And now, so this korban at the end of the 60-day period is your sacrifice. And so that is the process according to Rabbi Yoshua. So again, it's a process in which we make sure that we have two people, and always somebody has a sacrifice, and where nobody's going to, and all of the sacrifices of tahara are offered all at the same time. So Amar lo Ben Zoma. Ben Zoma says, listen, what you're doing is so unfair, because who's going to listen to this guy and become a Nazir next to him? Why would anybody do that? We don't even want people to be Nazirim. So as a result, that's not a great thing. So Ella, maybe chatas ha'ofa, olas behema. Rather, you don't even need a partner. So what happens at the end of the first 30 days? So the guy says that he brings a sin offering, that's a bird, and he brings an ola, that's an animal, and that's it. He just brings those two sacrifices. Because remember, if he just has the bird as a chatas, that bird as a chatas, if he's obligated, great, that's sufficient. And if he's not obligated, that's fine too, because that's okay to bring in a voluntary, in a suffix situation. And the ola, if he's obligated, if it's an ola, if he's bringing a full animal as an ola, that's an animal for a tara sacrifice. Well, that's fine too, because you can bring an ola for the animal sacrifice as a sacrifice if you're obligated. Of course, you could do that because you're obligated. And even if you're not obligated, well, then that's okay too, because you can bring an ola voluntarily. So, and what do you say now that you have these two karbanot? V'omer. If in fact I'm the tameh one, well then my sin offering that I'm offering is part of my obligation of becoming tahor, and my ola is just voluntary. And if I am tahor, well then the ola is part of my overall obligation, and the sin offering is just due to my uncertainty, and it's not actually something I'm obligated in. And then what do? You kavisover shloshim yom. Now you count an additional 30 days, maybe korban tahara, and now you bring a full set of the korban tahara, a full set of the korban tahara. And why? And what do you say? V'omer im tamei hayiti. If I was tamei originally, so again, my original ha'ola harishona nidava. Now my original ola was just a voluntary ola, and now at this moment I'm able to offer all three korbanot: an ola, an asham, and an ola, a chatas, and a shlamim. I can bring all three right now, so everything is fine. V'im tahor hayiti, and if I was a tahor, well then ha'ola harishana chova. Well, my original ola was the ola that I had to bring, v'zenidava, and the ola now I'm bringing is voluntary. But and what about the chatas and the shlamim that I'm bringing now? Vizu, those other karbanot, shar karbani, are the rest of the karbanot. I really should have brought them 30 days ago. But what I'm doing is I'm bringing some of my karbanot immediately and the other karbanot 30 days later. Well, that results in Rabbi Yeshua asking the following. Well, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, nimtza zeh mevi karbanosav l'chatzayim. He's bringing his karbanot in pieces. How could that be permitted? Well, we'll see in a moment how that could be permitted. But in the end, the Chachamim agree with Ben Zoma that it is okay to do this all by yourself. You don't need to bring somebody else in, and you bring the sacrifices in the form that Ben Zoma said. Meaning, originally you bring a sin offering of a bird and an ola offering of an animal, and then in the end you bring the ola, shlamim, and chatas, full-fledged animals, and you'll be covered any which way it is. And so now the Gemara asks the question: Vilaisi, what is the basis of Rabbi Yeshua's question, saying that how could you do this, Ben Zoma? You're bringing the karbanot over a period of time, and you're bringing them in pieces. Why should that not be something that is permitted? So the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Lo Amar Rabbi Yoshua El Chadei Ba Es HaTalmidim. So the whole purpose of Shmuel's statement was only to sharpen his students. So what in the world does that mean? So let's take a look in the Mefarish, fourth line of the wide lines, very end of the line. So Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Yodea Haya Rabbi Yoshua She'ein Tshuva So Klum. Rabbi Yoshua knew that when he asked the question about, well, aren't you bringing these offerings in piecemeal? He knew that that was not a real response. He knew that there was no reason that you couldn't do that. V'lo amar kach, and he only said this, ella kedei l'chadeid ba'es ha-talmidim. He did this in order to sharpen his students. How did he want to sharpen his students? Sheyehu nosin kal v'chomer, because he wanted them to reason the following. And this is really an important concept that is very useful to know and highlights an important thing that we need to always remember. Ba'atzman. And he wanted them to figure this out on their own. And what is the kal v'chomer? Uma Rabbeinu. Listen, what did our teacher just do? He realized that he was not saying anything useful, and yet he said it. Meshiv davar she'enu mishana, and he said something that had no response. Well, what about us? When we're unsure, when we don't know, and we have a question, what does that tell us about what we should do? Our teacher went ahead and said something that really wasn't necessary, wasn't even required. He knew it wasn't even a good point, and yet he made the point. He made the point in order to get us to think, but it really wasn't even a good point. And he knew it wasn't a good point. Well, kal v'chomer l'shar kol adam. Well, then certainly when it comes to any other person, sheyachol lahashib al divrei rabbo, when he has something to respond to the words of his teacher, va'afilu yodei bo she'ein b'dvar v'lo klum. Even if the teacher or he knows that he knows he doesn't understand. He knows that the question isn't going to be a good question at the end of the day. He just doesn't know why it's not a good question. And maybe his friends are going to tease him about it. Lo yimna milishal kol tzarko. There is no such thing as a bad question, right? He should not hold back from asking any kind of question that he needs. What a powerful statement. All right. And so we'll conclude now by saying with the last line. So Amar of Nachman, Maili Avilei. So almost in some ways ignoring this, and indeed Tosfos says that Rabbi Nachman's statement did not have the answer of Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar of Nachman, Maili Avidle Rabbi Yoshua l'dakei v'lo delo lisru. Well, what is Rabbi Yoshua going to do to make sure that the intestines don't spoil? Meaning, when Rabbi Yoshua responded and said, well, listen, you're bringing the offerings piecemeal. You're not bringing all your offerings at the same time. You might have thought that implies that Rabbi Yoshua is giving a wonderful advice. And therefore, there's nothing wrong with his approach. But what Rav Nachman is saying is, you know what? There is actually something wrong with Rabbi Yeshua's approach. And this is what it is. And this is based on the Mefarish's explanation that the idea here is the following, that when one brings the sacrifices, so the innards cannot be waved until the shaving of the head is done. Well, if you have two people whose heads need to be fully shaved, that's going to result in a delay of the waving. And that's going to mean that the innards of this animal that has been sacrificed are going to remain outside longer, and they could spoil. And so, Rabbi Yoshua, your method has deficiencies in it. And so as a result, don't think that Reb Nachman is again responding on behalf of Ben Zoma. Don't think that your way is so perfect. Even that is going to have problems. So we have been dealing with uncertainty associated with somebody possibly being tameh. And now what happens if not only is there a possibility of tuma, but there's a possibility of a Metzora status? Well, for that, stay tuned for tomorrow's stuff. So we'll pick up with the Mishnah at the bottom of the Tet, God willing, tomorrow, same bad time, same bad channel. Look forward to seeing you all, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi, as always.